For the kids who, whether diagnosed or not, because a lot of kids are undiagnosed, how does ADHD actually show up on the field or on the court or in the rink or whatever it is? Like, what might a coach or a parent misinterpret as maybe laziness or a bad attitude that is actually tied to ADHD, but we just don't realize it?
As you were asking the question, the first thing I was going to say, all the things that probably frustrate you as a coach potentially could be linked to ADHD. And you hit on some of those already, but whether it's, you're trying to have a 5-minute conversation to teach a skill and it's the kid who's interrupting or they're not sitting still, um, or it's the kid who looks lazy, they're not you don't perceive that they are giving full effort, or the inconsistency you mentioned in performance. Uh, I think it's at least considering before we label them, excuse me, as a bad person or a bad whatever. Because a point that I try to make all the time is that ADHD is not a deficit in character. You can still have ADHD and be a great human being, a great kid. It's not a character deficit. It's literally a chemical deficit at its core. And it's so easy to go to this, man, that kid, even, and I think we've all, as me as a youth sports coach, you have that kid that oh geez, here we go, they're interrupting me, they're doing this, and you almost start structuring
I
practice
just had
to
four
kind
kids
of.
pop in my head.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. I feel I appreciate the validation, and that I'm not just a horrible coach myself. But that's essentially where it's going to show up, and it's so challenging too because, and I know I've posted some comments or some content around this idea that for most kids this is true, but especially our ADHD athletes, practice is probably their favorite part of the day, even though they may show up psychologically different. And if you think about the life experience of that person with ADHD, they do receive a lot more negative attention from teachers usually, probably also negative attention from parents, getting onto them for all the conduct things that show up. And sports is a natural dopamine release. They get to run around, be free, be with their friends. They probably spend all day looking forward to this practice, and here we are as a coach dreading that, okay, I'm going to have to coach around this. I'm going to have to be prepared. I'm going to have to have a plan of how I manage this. But that's essentially the first little, if we're doing a checkbox of, if this kid is frustrating you, let's at least consider that maybe, again, not a character deficit. There could be something else going on.
So for the parents who have that kid, like you're just they're riding down the road listening to this episode, and you're like, okay, you're describing my kid now. I two parts of this question, I think. Number one, how can the parent support that kid in, I don't want to say motivating them, but leading them and guiding them and helping them understand themselves? And then I think the second part, if you can, how can the parent interact with the coach to help the coach maybe understand how the kid is working? Not ask for special privileges, not like nothing like that, but like if I know my kid has ADHD or something, like how can I tell their coach about this and let them know some cheat codes that might work with them?
Yeah. And again, for the coaches listening, I absolutely agree. Even at 10U soccer, we still have standards. We still have some framework of how we practice, how we operate, and hold to those standards. I'm not saying that we have to accommodate everything that happens. I'm saying more as just a consideration as you're looking, before we write this kid off as a bad kid, let's look to see what's going on. I think for the parent, I think the tricky thing you mentioned, because I'll get a lot of comments around the point you made, and I'm going out of order, but how do I get this coach to understand? And I wrestle with that question because, one, I think for the parent, having some insight on, will this coach even be receptive to a conversation? Because on the one hand, I don't think there's any point of sharing medical information with, if you've already decided this coach is not the right fit or the right coach, they're probably not going to listen to what you say, or they're going to write you off as you're just making excuses or whatever the case might be. So on the front end of like, what's my relationship like with this coach? Are they even going to be receptive to a conversation? And I think you hit on, if they are receptive to it for the parent side, I agree with you. We're not framing it as making accommodations or not making any kind of special treatment or anything along those lines. I think just providing some education around, hey, this is what my kid tends to respond to. This is because usually the ADHDers don't respond well to a lot of negativity. They're going to be really sensitive to that, to the rejection piece if they're feeling that. and really trying to low key start talking about the superpowers that show up. That, yeah, this kid may look lazy in practice, but when it's game time and you need that hyper focus, it's going to be the person that you want out there. And kind of coach the coach a little bit in terms of what to look for. And again, I think too, love and grace on the kid, loving your kid, and I think really being, not slipping into that gray area of, I'm trying to be your coach, but I'm your parent. Be the parent. Be their biggest fan, reinforcing all the good things they're doing. I think that's where I would start.